Welcome. I want to welcome my brother. I almost fell off the seat here. I want to welcome my brother, Pastor Chris Freeman. And this is a picture of allyship here. His mission and the church that he leads in the city has a powerful vision. And so, Pastor Chris, could I invite you to please introduce yourself and the mission and vision that you carry?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Dr. Losambe, thanks for having me here. And can I just clarify that it is a really tough act to follow you and Dr. Walker. So I appreciate the invite. It is great to be here. Loved what you both shared. And just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Freeman, pastor here in Fort Wayne. I founded and pastor City Church, which is located here on the south side. And that church started about 5 years ago. And our vision for our church is to be a multi-ethnic, multi-economic, and multi-generational church that is radically committed to Jesus, to each other, to our city, and our world. And so that's just the journey that we've been on and the journey that I've been on personally. And so I want to clarify, I am not here as an expert, but as a learner and as somebody who just really deeply cares about this conversation.
And I'm so thankful for you and the vision that you carry and the posture you take in this allyship journey as well. And that is precisely what we're going to talk about today, Pastor Freeman. When we talk about the journey, it requires boldness, it requires courage. And there were a few characteristics that we talked about and that are important to emphasize. The first thing is competence. It's important for us to know ourselves, just as Nelson Mandela said, to regulate ourselves and not lead with our automatic thoughts and automatic feelings sometimes when we see somebody who might be different or when we approach a situation that is uncertain. We need to know who we are in that situation, be able to regulate our primary emotions, be able to take off our shoes and step into somebody else's shoes and look at their perspective on the issues that they are bringing up. Relational skills, what it takes for us to really be in community, to have relationships with each other, and have a pathway for action. So this work has to be very intentional. It has to be very scripted at times, but really leading from the heart as well. Pastor Chris, as we talked about some of these things that underlie competence, what are some things in your journey that have really been impactful and meaningful to you?
Yeah, as you kind of lay that out, there's a book that I know you love to read that I also love to read. And in one of the letters in that book, James chapter 1, verses 19, 20, and 21, it says this: "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And so as you're talking about just regulating ourselves and understanding who we are, I think that is so important, especially in the world that we live in today and in the culture that we live in, where it's kind of the opposite of that, right? Everybody is quick to speak but slow to listen. And so when you log into a Facebook account or a social media account, what's the first question that they ask? What's on your mind? Speak your mind, rather than take some time to listen. And when I was a kid growing up, my dad used to always tell me that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You need to listen twice as much as you speak. And so I think it's just really important for us to be quick to listen and to really try to listen to understand and to also be slow to speak and then finally to be slow to become angry. And in conversations where you're not understanding, if you're finding yourself angry, even just ask that question. Where's that coming from? Why am I angry right now? And that'll help you to get a better understanding of who you are.
Thank you, Pastor Chris. And I know that has played out often in the work you do and in your life. When we talk about a pathway, there's a few things that come to mind as to different categories we can be very intentional with. In our relationships, what are our goals, relationship goals for this work? What is your current state and what is your ideal state? Identifying your blind spots. What are things that you can learn from? Also peer support. Who's on this journey with you to encourage you? Education. How am I advancing knowledge in the people group I'm advocating for in this journey in allyship? And critical consumption. What am I investing in as far as that education? And Pastor Chris, when we were talking through this a little bit, you said something that challenged me and something that I think will really allow us to really have high expectations for ourselves and each other in this journey towards shared humanities allyship. So could you help us understand some of what you talked about, especially as it relates to critical consumption?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I want to emphasize or re-emphasize first what Dr. Walker said earlier, which is that you've got to own this work, right? And so we each have to own our work in this. But specifically when it comes to critical consumption, I think it's really important for us to not just evaluate who is speaking to us or who we're listening to, so what news sources or where you're going to. And one of the things I've seen play out a lot of times, particularly in the majority culture, is that we will identify someone who maybe doesn't look like us, but shares the exact same perspectives that we do. And then if we're not careful, we can use that one individual to justify all of our personal beliefs. So I think in your critical consumption, make sure that you are seeking out challenging perspectives that are really going to push against you. And so, I'm just going to be real with you and just share practical experiences that I've seen. If you are someone who says, well, Candace Owens said this, and I'm just want to be real about that. Candace Owens is brilliant. She's really smart, but she doesn't represent all minorities, and she doesn't represent all African Americans. And so it's really important for you, first of all, to remember that minorities are not a monolith. And then secondly, to make sure that you're looking for someone other than just someone who may share the same perspective or value that you have.
Thank you, Pastor Chris, for sharing that. The other thing that really allows us to take this journey forward with each other towards unity and reconciliation is alignment. Oftentimes we have a big purpose, a big P purpose, and then there are times where we can also have a little p purpose. As a result of that, that is something that you take with you into different situations. Maybe your goal is to listen more so that you can gain a better understanding of different perspectives. That is a purpose that you can carry with you. Maybe it's to create an environment where you are asking people to bring out what might be important to them so that you can understand how to better support them. That is a purpose you can carry with you. And the brain does something amazing, Pastor. The brain does something amazing. When you set goals and write them down, the part of your brain that monitors, like maybe somebody might be following you, the same part of your brain that is wary of that situation, of that monitoring and that surveillance, is the same part of your brain that lights up when you write down your goals. So you're always comparing yourself to that goal and holding yourself accountable. So if you didn't listen well, or if you didn't create an environment where people could tell you how to support them, etc., you will start to recognize that easier.
That's right.
So Pastor Chris, on your journey, as you have gone through different seasons and been in different rooms and created different relationships, what has really allowed you to articulate that purpose, that little P purpose amidst the big purpose?
Yeah, I think a huge part of that for me is just relationships.
Yes.
And making sure that I have meaningful relationships, that I'm in close proximity with people who have different lived experiences than I do, and that for me enables me to make sure my motivation is more internal than external, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And that keeps me focused on that purpose. And then additionally, I don't know if now is a good time to share this or not, but
Yes.
but for us, just going back to that vision statement,
Yes.
right? Having that vision statement for our church keeps me accountable. So it's very clear. Earlier, Dr. Walker and you were talking about an organization that said we want a vision of respecting each other. That's way too vague. But if we can be much more clear about the purpose that we have for our organizations, then it keeps the senior leader accountable. It keeps everybody on the team accountable, and also it just communicates clarity for everybody. We all know where we're going and the direction we're heading.
That's excellent, Pastor. And you remind me of what we're going to talk about next, which is action and advocacy. We have something called a primary advocate and a secondary advocate that has been published and articulated. A primary advocate is someone who is really advocating for a change in practices and policies and laws. And a secondary advocate is more on the ground, an individual kind of relationship, really carrying the brand of unity wherever you go. The important thing to emphasize here is that we need both.
Right.
We need those people who are going to be on the ground in the organizations, forming and forging relationships, but we also need those advocates for those policies and practices, because those policies and practices outlive any one individual. Whereas if we rely on secondary advocates, when they leave, it might also leave with them. So we need both. We need both now, and we need both in the future. And when you talked about the importance of mission and vision, it really clarified that for me.
Yeah.
The next step, Pastor, is interdependence, for us to know our why, for us to know our purpose. And we talked about this mindset, victory mindset and anti-fragility. And we used the analogy or the acronym of BRAVE. Be aware of your strengths, the relationships you take on this journey, the adoption of a growth mindset, valuing different perspectives, and embracing a shared humanity. Pastor Chris, if you could talk a little bit about the relationships that you have forged, not only in this work, but also through your ministry and through your church and through your lived experiences as well.
Yeah, so we planted our church in the south side of Fort Wayne, and the neighborhood that we're in is incredibly diverse. It's actually the most diverse neighborhood in all of our city, and so it enabled us to have that proximity, but proximity doesn't guarantee relationship. I think that's important for us to understand, that just because you're nearby doesn't mean you're going to have that relationship. It creates opportunity to pursue it. But then over time, it's just the experiences that I've had. It's been amazing as we started our church, how many of my friends, I grew up here in Fort Wayne, played football at Snyder High School, proud second string football player there, but had a great experience there. But how many of those guys that I had an opportunity to form relationships with, even in the locker room and on the football team, are now part of my church community. And these are guys from every walk of life. And so I think it's important to remember that you're pursuing people and not treating them as projects.
Yes.
That is so critical. And that this is about real life relationship with each other. It's not about checking something off the box or making yourself feel good. It's really about loving people. And so for me, this is just at the core of who I am, because again, going back to that book that you and I love so much, the central command is really just two things. It's to have this vertical focus of loving God with all my heart, but then this horizontal focus of loving my neighbor as myself. And so it's just a continual pursuit and a learning process.
Thank you for saying that. That's very powerful. And that relationship piece, that people piece is so important. Pastor Chris, as we were talking a little bit about external and internal motivations, you talked so well about how external motivations can often be somewhat of a barrier in terms of reactive versus proactive.
Sure.
Could I invite you to share a little bit more of that?
Yeah, I think, again, there's grace in this process,
Yes.
right, for everybody. So you need to understand where you are, and if your motivations right now are primarily external, again, that's okay. You acknowledge that, but it's not okay to stay there, right? So you want to continually be moving toward these internal motivations, because if your motivations are external, then you will always be operating in a reactionary method. So when a crisis happens and it makes national news, then there is a reaction to say, now I need to do some work in allyship. Now I need to reach out. And can I just say that if the only time you reach out to someone who has a different lived experience than you is when someone who maybe shares similar lived experiences to them is going through crisis, that's a terrible relationship. That's not a healthy relationship. And so if your motivations are external, they're going to be reactionary. But if they're internal, then you will be doing this work without needing a national crisis to motivate you. You will be doing the work ahead of time and just building relationships, learning and growing, understanding that, yes, there are still going to be crises that happen. There are going to be tragedies that unfold. But there's relationships that are built there, so that then when you reach out, it's coming from a place of trust.
That's excellent, Pastor Chris. And when you were speaking, when we were talking, we talked about the fact that, we are describing an ideal in many ways. Sometimes these relationships are hard to foster, to initiate, especially if you might be more introverted than extroverted. It's difficult to sort of forge these connections and relationships. And as adults, and as I read the research, there's a few things that we have often forgotten to do. We have forgotten how to play. Play is a good way for us to form bonds. Maybe you set a connection or a relationship around a goal to do activity with one another. And the brain and the body in general releases chemicals when you are doing activity together that allows for bonding, allows for creativity. So maybe you can invite somebody for a walk. Maybe you can invite somebody for a game night. Maybe you can ask somebody, what is a restaurant that you like that we can kind of frequent together? And consistency in that relationship is important. Vulnerability is also important, but that comes with time, as you said.
Absolutely.
And I'm really thankful for that. Pastor Chris, the last thing that I would love to talk about, or the second to last thing, are barriers to this allyship. And some of the barriers include, you might be unaware of your impact.
That's right.
And it's so important for you to really set up a situation where you are having meetings with yourself to assess your impact. Difficulty with dialogue, where we feel as though we have to say the right thing or be punished for it, or have the right posture or be punished for it. Barriers are inauthentic relationships, just like I talked about, expecting perfection, and also not knowing how to take that first step or contribute. As you've encountered barriers to this, Pastor Chris, what have been some things that you've encountered and maybe pushed through or have worked through a little bit?
Sure, yeah, and I would agree with every single one of those statements, and I think that the key word here for me all day has been that word humility, right? And so I think it's really important for us, for all of us, to remember to not try to lead beyond where we've learned. And so to know, hey, I need to be taking steps forward, I need to be doing something, but I don't want to step beyond where I've learned and where I've grown. And so that requires that humility and that self-reflection. I also think that just being real and honest, as you enter into these kinds of relationships and this kind of work, this allyship work towards shared humanity, there's going to be pushback sometimes in multiple directions, right? So I loved the example that Dr. Walker gave of walking on that tightrope, and I think all of us can relate to that maybe on some level of, you just mentioned this fear of not knowing what to say or saying the wrong thing and being punished for it, and then on the other side of it, and this is something that I've experienced personally, is that as we have continued to lean into the vision that we have, and you know, as I teach and preach and lead my church community forward, I've had people come to me and say, hey, we're going to leave. And I actually just, you know, last year had a family come and say, I want to let you know we're leaving and why we're leaving. And I said, okay, can you tell me why you're leaving? And they said, we're leaving because we can tell that you don't like white people. And I thought about it for a second. I said, well, my wife's white, my kids are white, and I like them. Maybe I just don't like all white people, right? But there's a lot of white people that I love. But I think what they were really getting at is that they felt that way, maybe more because of what's going on in their heart.
Yes.
And so as we're moving in this direction, there are going to be people that may check out of that. And so I just want to encourage you, don't shrink back when that happens. And so I was able to still, you know, communicate, hey, we love you. We would love for you to stay on this journey. But the personal conviction that I had around that was, if God has given us a vision, we can either prioritize keeping people or leading people. And so we're just going to choose to continue to try to lead people. That means some people may not catch on right away, but you know what? There's grace for them, and they may come around eventually. So we've got to continue to stay on the right path and move in that direction.
Thank you, Pastor Chris. The last thing I would love to discuss today is the interplay. Earlier we talked about identity development for people of color, and we talked about how there are different stages that you may find somebody in before they have an encounter with somebody or a societal narrative, etc. And there's an interplay there where you might be in a stage where you might not agree with how somebody is framing or explaining what they've gone through from a philosophical or value perspective. And it might not be helpful if you bring that out in that moment. Right. And so, Pastor Chris, you talked about pain appropriation versus pain appreciation. Yeah. In those moments where there is friction, in those moments where there's tension and maybe a missing of beliefs, what did you mean by pain appropriation versus pain appreciation?
Yeah, and maybe even before I answer that, I'll start with a definition that a good friend of mine, and many of you know, who's helping to lead this initiative, Ira Kedley, once said that the definition of empathy is that when somebody tells you something about their lived experience, believe them. Believe them. And I thought, man, that is so simple and so profound. Why would I need to argue with you about your experience? But I also think sometimes on the other side of that, when somebody may be sharing about their pain, sharing about their experience, we may have a desire so much so to connect and to relate with them or to overcome that tension that we try to, rather than appreciate their pain, we try to appropriate their pain. So I'll just give an example. Just a couple weeks ago, one of my neighbors on the next block over had a pretty bad house fire. And so if I would have went to that neighbor and said, man, I saw your fire, and I can totally relate to what you're experiencing, because when my dad was a kid, he grew up on a farm, and the farm next door to him, they had a barn fire. And so I totally understand what you're going through right now. I'm missing it, right? And they're going to go, actually, no, you don't get it. You don't understand. And so as a pastor and as a leader, one of the things that I've learned that creates an open door for relationship and for trust is that when somebody is experiencing pain, don't try to appropriate their pain, and actually acknowledge, I have no idea what it's like to be walking through what you're walking through right now. I've never experienced anything like that. But I just want you to know that I see that you're going through it. I hear you, and I'm here to come alongside you. I care about you. And the honest truth is, I don't think I could walk through this near as well as you are right now. And so I just want to honor you in that and want you to know that I'm here for you. And I think when you can lead with that kind of honesty, it creates an open door for deeper relationship and trust to say, okay, yeah, that's right. You don't know, but you're willing to learn.
Yes. And it reminded us, as we were dialoguing about this, Dr. Walker said, it reminds me of that chart you showed last month where you talked about hijacking a person's story or amplifying the story or supporting them in that.
That's right.
And that's what that reminded us of.
Yeah.
Pastor Chris, I'm so thankful for you. Thankful for your heart. Thankful for your vision and thankful for your wisdom. It's been a robust discussion.
Yeah.
We have learned with you and from you today. And I'm so thankful for your partnership on this journey. And I'm excited for what's to come for you and your church as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Losambe. It's been a real blessing to be here. And I just want to again say in front of everybody who's here in the room and tuning in online, what a blessing you are to all of us on this journey together. So thank you for investing in us this way.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So good.